Well, good morning. Does this work? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming here. This is an early start, but hopefully it'll be a fun start for the day. So my name is Shema Gargash. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of Energy and Sustainability in the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A very unique department within the Foreign Service. But we're here today to talk about the 2026 UN Water Conference. Today's session is going to be more of an informal dialogue and very interactive to really delve into the thematics of the interactive dialogue for the upcoming 26 conference. This is more or less our first deep dive, informal consultations on the themes, which we have not started. The first half of next year will be when the PGA meeting will meet with member states and where the themes will also be discussed. But this is a good start for us to start this kind of small stepping stone towards kind of formulating ideas and work towards kind of defining the themes, and then gradually the co-chairs will be selected. Unfortunately, our colleagues from Senegal are not here. We had a session yesterday at the UAE Pavilion, and in that session, we basically delved into a bit more general discussion around the UN conference. Just to go over a few quick elements, I'm just going to take you through very quickly kind of the modalities of the conference. The resolution came out on the 6th of September, and that basically defines the framework and the guiding principles for the UN 2026 Water Conference. There'll be an opening and closing ceremony. There are 7 plenaries, which hasn't changed since the last conference. But in this upcoming round of conference, there'll be 6 interactive dialogues rather than 5. And of course, there'll be a number of side events and side engagements during the 3-day period. There are also, as I mentioned, the adoption of the resolution. In the resolution, it defines 2 to 4 December 2026 as the days of the conference. It will take place in the UAE. There's also key preparatory meetings that will take place in 2025. One will be the PJ meeting, as I mentioned earlier, and then the second will be the prep conference or prep meeting that will take place in Senegal towards the end of 2025. Selection of co-chairs, we're hoping to have that set within the mid-year, mid-25. In terms of the consultations, we've already kickstarted the informal but also the formal consultations of our discussions with all the stakeholders, member states, non-state actors, and trying to leverage a lot of the important platforms taking place across the globe and trying to have some regional consultations throughout the process. Through this process, we'll also be formulating the vision statement that we kind of will be tweaking with our colleagues from Senegal, and that will be issued hopefully very soon. And in the context, we wanted to ensure that we really delved into the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We wanted to ensure that water is cross-cutting, and that it builds on a lot of the SDGs as well, focusing on SDG 6, but also kind of the making sure that we don't forget water within the other sectors, ensuring that it's cross-cutting as well as we start thinking of creating a baseline for the conference. The 2023 consultations or conference that took place, the team did a phenomenal job with gathering data and consultations. And so there's a lot of data there that we can definitely take that to the next level. Our guiding principles for the conference, we wanted to make sure that the outcomes are impact-oriented, there is a form of continuity, co-creation, ensure that there is an inclusive process and includes everyone horizontally and vertically. We want to make sure that it's a meaningful participation and also ensure that in order to take it to that next level, we want to make sure that it's innovative, transformative. How do we take it to that next level, making sure that we're also not reinventing the wheel. In terms of next steps, as mentioned, there'll be a few upcoming preparatory meetings. Next year will be the meeting with the PGA. UNDESA has recently been appointed as a secretariat for the conference. And so there will be a PGA meeting with member states first half of next year, and then there will be a selection of the co-chairs. finalizing the vision statement. We'll continue having targeted consultations with various groups and various regional platforms. We'll participate in a lot of upcoming engagements, such as this one here, COP29. We'll continue that also in Saudi at CCD COP, and hopefully the One Water Summit as well. We will make sure that we prepare for upcoming high-level meetings next year, as mentioned earlier. And today's consultation, again, as mentioned, it'll basically focus on the themes of the interactive dialogues. I wanted to remind everyone on the 5 interactive dialogues that basically were the leads of the 23 conference, and there was an interactive dialogue on water for health. There was one for sustainable development, one for climate resilience and environment, cooperation, and Water Action Decade. And this here is basically coming up with, we want to ensure continuity, but we also want to make sure that we bring an additional add-on to transform the outcomes, making sure that they're quite very impactful, ensuring that we take it to that next level and sustain it. So Selma, do you want to? So we have a number of questions that we wanted to consult with you today and our folks online. Again, in the spirit of continuity, these are the list of questions that we'll be asking. We'll delve into it one by one. And Selma has come up with something I've not seen before, but I guess this is something that young
we're
people
gonna
do.
shift into a Menti quiz. So if you can bring your phones, and we're gonna pop the code up. It's 82167179. So give just people a few minutes to connect. So we're gonna basically go over the questions that Shema just showed on the screen, but in a Menti way. We're gonna stop after every question and hear reflections. Sorry, the number is very small on top.
So it's 82167179. 82167179. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, let's start first with an icebreaker. Okay, what was how many people here were at the UN 2023 Water Conference? Okay, we have a good number. Then very quickly, what was your favorite part, most cherished memory of the UN 2023 Water Conference? Oh my God, that's good. Dude, Hank. Hank, did you write that? Very nice. Very nice. I mean, we're getting questions about the second part, so let me just move to the next question. And I'm sorry, I'm running through this very quickly, but because I want to get into the content. Oh. Yeah. But I mean, like, there are other questions we'll use to reflect. Okay, describe the outcome of the UN 2023 Water Conference in one word. And this doesn't have to be like a function of you attending or not, just now, looking back, how would you describe it? Very nice.
This is very cool, by the way.
Right?
I've never seen this.
Oh, very nice words. Someone has confusing in there. I want to hear more. Wow. Sorry, it's getting small, but I can try to read some of the words. Starting point, challenge, political momentum, important first step, a lot of first steps actually, groundbreaking, historic, homework, interesting, unstructured, challenging, overdue, political attention, perspective. Okay, that's really cool. I want to have time to reflect on all that, so maybe we can come back to these reflection points in the end after we discuss the themes, because I know some people have to run to other meetings in a bit, but this is really good, I guess. Okay, what's one thing from the last conference that you would like to see continue in 2026? Engagement, themes and co-chairs. Nice. Consultations. Governance. Very nice. Oh, we have more questions. I think we can. All generations, crowded, leadership and actions. Manu, is there a way we can see the. Yeah. Civil society, walk to action agenda. And feel free to, if you want to reflect on any of the things or anyone had a question, an answer here that wants to reflect on even more, please feel free to just put your hand up and I can pass the mic. Okay. But we have a lot of questions to get through. Maybe we won't go through all questions, but yeah. Now, what's one thing you would like to change or you think could have been done differently? Oh, there's a declaration. High level attendance. Transparency and preparatory process. Negotiated outcome. A lot of things on declaration and negotiated outcomes and high level. Water Pact. This is the Global Commission's new language, right? Hank. Yeah?
Yeah. So the story behind the Water Pact was that in the group of friends meeting in the lead up to the UN Water Conference, so that was 2021 in the fall, October 2021, which was still online. We agreed in the resolutions to have a non-negotiative outcome. I said to the team in the Netherlands, I said, that's not enough. So they got a little bit scared. So I threw in the group of friends meeting that we had to get to a global pact on water. My phone exploded. And not only from not friends, but also from friends, especially from friends. They're like, what the fuck are you doing? So we can't get to a global pact on water. So the result of that provocation was the water action agenda, but that's of course not enough. So the fact that the Global Commission says a pact or whatever we call it, but the fact that you have to agree on something that is so important is key. It's crazy that we can't agree on something that we all say, yeah, it's the most important thing in life, but let's not agree on something. It's like nobody understands it. If I tell this to my cousins, they're like, no, I don't understand this. If you think this is the most important thing, cross-cutting everywhere, we can't fix climate, biodiversity, our economy without water, then you better agree on it fast before you move on. So I think there's a tension and a challenge that we're afraid to do that. So and I don't care how you call it. Yeah.
Point. Okay, a lot of content here that we would want to dive into, but let's just get to the last question on the icebreakers before we get into the theme. In one word, describe your ambition for the UN 2026 Water Conference. Political importance, commitment to action. Transformative, tangibly, I like that. Okay, this is very nice. I think Shaima and I and our colleagues from Senegal have a lot of homework to do to read and reflect on all this. But now I think this is just a quick icebreaker that we wanted to do to get where you stand on the water conference before we dive into the themes. And now we're going to solely focus on themes right now. And if I can hand over to Shaima right now to go on.
Okay. Do you wanna go over the next? So again, this is just a reminder of the themes that the themes of the 2023 Water Conference. There is health, sustainable development, cooperation, decade, etc. And so, can you just go back to the previous slide? Sorry. So again, this is just to remind everyone of the 5 themes: water cooperation, climate resilience and environment, sustainable development, health, and the decade. And now we can go on to the next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay.
I think I can pass on the mic now to anyone who wants to reflect about anything. So please just feel free to pull your hand up to speak more about this. Danny.
I just wanted to reflect on the outcomes of this exercise, which I found really interesting. So thanks for bringing in the technology. What I saw is that we have, 30 people here, and we have 30 answers, right? So there's very little emergence of commonality, right? So I think we also have to accept that this can't be everything to everyone all the time, and we will need to find the compromise to come together and focus on the things that are really going to advance. So in my view, it's really important that we don't diversify into 100 different directions, because we won't make the impact that we need to make with the political decision makers. So I just like to recall that just my observation from this particular exercise. So thank you.
Thank you. Johannes? Oh.
Yeah, I was one of the knowers here. I want to out myself. I worked in the UN with Henk at the time. If you continue something in the UN is a diplomatic process. If you continue something, the people will cling desperately on what has happened in the past. If you want to bring change and innovation and forward-looking things, you need to change you don't need to change the topic, but you need to change the framing. It's a framing question. I think very many good things were in the IADs. We can build on them, but we need to change them, because otherwise they will just paste and copy what they had done before. So I have a very strong opinion on that.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Guy Bonvin from the Swiss Embassy here, but former Swiss envoy for water. I think, yes, what you mentioned is absolutely correct, but at the same time, there's an absolutely need to take stock of what happened the last 18 months or the last, since 2023. So I think it's important not to throw away all the dialogue and to continue and to deepen, but at the same time looking forward. I mean, looking ahead and not being stuck in the past. But I think key topics which were listed, the 5 dialogues, are absolutely must to continue. And if I add one thing, sorry, make also the link, maybe this is what is missing, with other key conversation on climate, biodiversity, and of course finance.
Thank you. Evita, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much for that, also for organizing this meeting, Salma and Shema. I think just now we've seen the ambition that we all set together. And first off, Senegal and UAE, you're not by yourselves. We have this whole group of friends of water together here at the Water Pavilion, and we're all very happy to help. I think it's very important with the large ambition, with the political leadership that we've also seen that we really need, and as organizing UN 2023 Water Conference, because I work for the government of the Netherlands, maybe for those that don't know me. I think it's very important that we also build on what we've also decided or what we developed in larger consultations with other group of stakeholders. Those were the 5 themes. I think it's interesting that you wanted to add a 6th theme if something is if it's not encompassing. However, what I would also suggest, maybe as a way in the middle, that the concept notes will be, of course, newly defined, building on the previous concept notes, but again, making sure it's all inclusive, action-oriented, and cross-sectoral, that we include stakeholders from other sectors as well. So I would highly advocate for keeping the themes. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, it's really interesting to see that every group we've engaged with, non-state actors and actors, there's consistency in kind of maintaining the same themes, and so that's definitely something we're happy to see a lot of consistency and alignment in, and so we'll see kind of where that will take us. And I do agree, Johannes, on kind of reframing things, and the topics can be the topics, but how we get there will depend on us.
And I'm happy to pass on the mic to other people just to let you know that for their next question, we're going to add just the yes with some tweaks to see what else you want to see captured. So if you have reflections specifically about that, I suggest you just hold them to the next question. If not, happy to pass them on.
Just a quick question for me. I think, is it worth just recapping on what the official results and outcomes were of the 23 conference? Because I think if, it was a while back and I was there, but I think it would be very helpful to understand what the official kind of version of the outcomes of the 23 conference was, so that we can reflect on that and then build on that. I just feel that we've given our input there, but that was all the unofficial, informal kind of feedback, whereas I haven't seen a kind of one-page summary of exactly what the official outcomes were from the conference.
So basically, there were over 840 voluntary outcomes that came out of the 23 conference. The one thing that was more or less seen as a negotiated outcome was the summary report. And I think there were a few elements and projects that were initiated or suggested within the outcomes that are projects we see today. But there wasn't any. All the outcomes that came out were basically difficult to monitor, to manage. The UN does not have authority over the supervision. Countries can decide to submit their outcomes on water. There's a big emphasis on embedding water within NDCs, for instance. And so there's like a cross-cutting number of elements. And so when you talk about kind of what are the outcomes, there was a lot of outcomes. And everything and anything was a part of the outcomes, but nothing was really tangible to showcase progress and kind of enforce countries to.
Yeah, I think.
Ah, okay. Kill the mic. Just a little bit insight on the outcome. Officially in the modalities resolution for the UN 2023 Water Conference that was negotiated, the outcome was set as a report by the PGA of the conference. So that had to be like a very factual outcome. There was a lot of debate with the PGA and the PGA office on that factual outcome, and it took forever. Instead of that, it was there the last day. So there was a lot of confusion between membership and the PGA. The second part were the 843 commitments in the Water Action Agenda. And UN Water will, and UN DESA are reporting back on them every high-level political forum. It's a week reporting back, but there is that. I think the most important part of the outcome was that there was a clash in what the expectations were among the membership, the UN system and the PGA and stakeholders, that after weeks of disturbance and confusion, at least led to a negotiated document, a resolution agreed upon on September 1 in that same year that said we have 2 follow-up conferences and we need a system-wide strategy from the UN. So you could say that the official outcome of the conference was not secured, but the unofficial outcome of that, of course, was that negotiated document where it said, this can't be it. We need another one in 2026. And thanks UAE and Senegal for picking up that ambition. And 2028 and finalizing the Water Action Decade. So that was not stated in the outcome of the conference, but without the conference we would not have had that resolution. But just to give an insight, it was like a hard-fought battle. And the resolution itself was less hard-fought, you could almost say, than getting to an agreement that we had to have that resolution. So it took weeks and a lot of disturbance among membership that, including my own, that really could not settle on the fact that there need to be more than just that. And then the negotiation of the modalities of that resolution, knowing that we were in the midst of wars and conflicts and geopolitical tensions, we got an outcome where none of the membership went against it. So that you could say that there's more alignment among membership to get to something than we often think. But we have a hard time capitalizing on the fact that that is actually there. Yeah.
There's a lot of reflections. Okay, is it about the overall outcomes or specific themes? Okay, can we wait until the next question to just gather answers in until we respond? So Shaima, next question.
The next question. What are the priorities you would like to see captured in the themes of the 2026 Water Conference to give more dedicated attention?
Yeah, so basically, specifically for the people that said yes with some tweaks, what would you also like to see as additions or captures, like additional priorities that are captured within existing themes, or dedicated a full theme for it as the 6th interactive dialogue, so everything can be added in here? Maybe 1 minute and I'll pass on Maggie to you. So we can see that financing, Rio conventions, and governance are the ones receiving like the most occurrence. You can maybe reflect on that after.
Thank you. So actually, it comes really nicely into my intervention after this slide. I want to build up on what Danny and Johanna said and think about the outcomes. I think it's important to think what kind of outcome we want at the 2026 and the 2028 conference and at the end of this, because that will shape what we do and how we get there and with whom. So actually being more forward-looking about it. And since then, yes, there's the UN Water Strategy that has occurred. How do we engage the other themes more, that other communities? So it's not about in health, it's not about WASH, but how do we get the health people into the discussion with us moving forward? Same thing with climate. How do we get the climate people with us on board moving forward? There's a Pact for the Future. That is going to be shaping the post-2030. How do we create a dialogue and a narrative to influence the discussions of the post-2030? Because I think that's going to change the way we address the 2026 and the 2028 conference coming up. And also, who do we bring into the conversation? And how do we enhance that collaboration across the different areas, the different themes, and bring the other stakeholders in? So I think it's about doing better, deeper with what we already have. And maybe it's about thinking a bit differently of who we want around the table also. So yes, continuity, but with a very clear objective of 2030 and post-2030, because I think that's the big stake of why we want to make the narrative of why water should be there and why it's important in reaching the SDGs and the post-SDGs.
Thank you. Someone else? Oh.
Yes, thank you again. I think being here involved also in the negotiation on the climate, I think it is quite important to make this link, cross-link with other sectors like climate change, like biodiversity. This is one thing. So financing is definitely a key, and it is the battle here, and is also a battle in the water sector, and making absolutely the link to the adaptation finance here. So I think there are two different processes, but actually one. And I think also to insist also clearly about the effect on the climate change on water cycle and what are the economic consequences on biodiversity, etc. And I think it is an important thing. And on that, I would say acceleration also on data and information, capacity development, absorption, governance. I mean, this is all topics we are also actively promoting here at Switzerland, and nexus approach. So that's the way we would like to see it. And okay, specifically in my heart of before transboundary cooperation, 652. But transboundary in all, and I think this is what we see also on the screen. I mean, transboundary in all meaning of it. I mean, be cross-cutting teams across the countries, across the basin. And I think this is something we should see clearly to be taken up. Thank you.
Hello? Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. I want to build off first Johannes's comment and also, I'd like to build off Johannes's comment and also Maggie's comment. I think if we there's a point or there's a value in having continuity, but if we keep with exactly as before, then we'll have the same conversations and not much new or different is as likely to occur. So I think that is we're really trying to be provocative and we're trying to change the game. Oops. And I would say that we can. So it might be an issue of keeping the same topics, but really framing them differently to promote different outcomes, the outcomes that we desire. That said, if we do keep them, I would actually say that we could go ahead and remove the water action decade. I don't think, especially now that we have the agenda that we've been building on, that we have the 2030 goal that everybody's working towards, adding a different decade that, to be honest, has never had the same level of attention or focus is more of a distraction. And unless we're really striving for very specific outcomes by 2028, and that by 2028 we will have the next. So maybe that's why we have to keep it in. But I would also say that is one that could go off the list, because if we add too many more, if we add a sixth, we could again sort of go at risk of diluting our own success.
I just wanted to say something maybe a little bit provocative. I think, well, and we're discussing about the themes, and it's obvious that then we are linking to the outcomes and we want to know more. I think within the next conference, I think there should be appetite to discuss things that are unpleasant to discuss as well. I think over the years, you know, when I have transitioned from a national government into the international scene, and I've been working with the UN system for many years now, I have always felt something, and I throw this in many discussions, and I see that there is zero appetite to discuss, is the global governance of water is so scattered in a very weird manner across UN agencies in a way that nobody can understand actually what is the rationale as to why is that. We see that topics have made it into agencies, HIV or women or other topics. Interestingly, well, we do have a strong UN water coordination mechanism, but we don't have an agency. And I think, again, I throw this in many, and I see there is zero appetite to discuss the global governance of water. We are advocating for national governance. We complain sometimes how water is scattered among different ministries, but we never reflect as to why the global governance of water across the UN system and beyond is so scattered, again, emphasizing in a way that sometimes it's difficult to see the rationale.
So 1.5, what does the number 1.5 mean here? Anybody? Climate goal? What else does 1.5 mean? $1.5 trillion is what it takes to solve the global water crisis. I think we need to define a new 1.5 in the context of water, because that is the choke point. That is the elephant in the room. We know that public sector financing isn't coming any stronger. We know the multilaterals and bilaterals really aren't bringing much more capital to this. We know that private capital markets are completely scared, but the private capital markets is where the money is. And right now, there's money in climate infrastructure, climate investing. We need to do a better story about putting bankability and financeability for all of these solutions forward so that the capital that is there, that green capital, can be translated into adaptation and resilience. We have a moment where the climate dialogue is bending more towards adaptation and resilience. But they want bankable deals. They want utilities that function. They want projects that actually bring in private sector businesses to help solve the problem. And so I think it's a mistake if we don't make financing, particularly not just the public sector financing, but private sector financing, a centerpiece of this. What I would like to see at the next conference is to have a invitation to the sovereign wealth funds, invitations to the institutional investors to say, look, we have the ability to take your capital and provide a financial return because so much value is created when people get access to water. You know, the whole coping cost associated with this, it's about $300 billion a year that people pay to cope with the water crisis. If we could redirect that funding in ways that yield bankable projects, bankable deals, then the capital markets will come in and we'll be able to have line of sight on the 1.5 trillion. So I think now is the moment to say we can do this. And I would just close. I'm the old man in the room here, so to speak. I was here for the first water decade. It was the 1980s. I was working in this sector in the 1980s to do this. What I've migrated to since then is water.org and water equity. Because of the bottleneck of financing that I saw, I have completely redefined water.org and water equity as a global financial institution that we've raised about $500 million in capital to apply to low-income countries, to women making a few dollars a day. So we have completely reoriented ourselves because we see this as the bottleneck and where we can have the most impact on the sector. And so what we need to do is to continue to build the financial plumbing that can connect the capital markets with the returns that they need with the women making a few dollars a day who need access to water. And it can be done. And the more we focus our resources on de-risking that, to illuminating the path for private capital to come in, we are going to make much greater gains on the 2 billion people who don't have access to water. And so to me, to see all of those things up there and not to have financing, and particularly private financing, and us creating a marketplace of ideas and bankable ways to solve this problem so that that capital can come in. If we can't focus on that, I think all of the other things that we're talking about that need money are not going to get funded either.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm taking the opportunity. I'm Sebastian from the German Environment Ministry. This is my first meeting in the water function, so glad to meet you all. I don't want to repeat things that have been said, but very briefly, I think for us, the perspective would be it's important not to reproduce what has been discussed in 23, and also not to reproduce the character of water we see today, meaning that we have a scattered landscape where water is kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So perspective would be that the preparatory process is fine if it reflects the topics we have. Maybe try not to expand them more and more. That kind of makes it difficult to control. But the broader discussions on topics need to lead to governance in the end. Ideas on forward-looking progress in the governance structure. So that kind of needs to be the goal we're aiming for, and not kind of discussions that kind of remain in the room without an idea of what's happening. Because being new to the topic, looking at 23, I understand the needs back then, but still the question is, so what to do with it? And I think that should be the aim for 26, to get out of there and say, we know a little more where to go. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm Diana Kopansky, and I'm the head of freshwater and wetlands in UNEP, UN Environment Program. And what I've always seen in the water space is this lack of realism of where our water comes from. It's from nature, it's from ecosystems, and we're not treating it in that way. When we treat water and even look at market opportunities in a way that we can account for ecosystem services, that we can pay for ecosystem services and enable, because water crosses boundaries, ecosystems also reach across borders. If we look at it in that way, and we need to get the accounting right? The wetland supplement is still not delivering what we need it to deliver for restoration action, even for mitigation potential of freshwater ecosystems, then we can also get the deals right. I think that what we've suffered before, and also coming into the emerging sort of talk about carbon markets, is that people have a hard time understanding how to account for freshwater ecosystems, for their ability to sink carbon, for the ability to emit as well. So we're seeing, topically, trying to approach this through a right to a healthy environment is really important. It partners up nicely and marries with the right to access to water and sanitation. And if you're not aware, I hope you are, if you're water people or if you're interested in water, the COP29 presidency has made a big push for water, articulating a water declaration and also rallying around countries and partners to take a lift on water. So I would like to see the 2026 and the 2028 water conferences, the UN water conferences, focus on what can we accelerate now. What can we do now? Not planning for the future. We've got 2030, we've got 2050, we've got the goals. Now, how does water as a medium, as a source of water and an ecosystem that that serves our needs for carbon, for nature, and for livelihoods and lives, how do we use that now to take action on the ground? And we, of course, have very strong, good UN content on science. We've got amazing SDG reporting and indicators that are still relevant. And these indicators have been completely underused. They're transparent, they're available as data. They point to priority ecosystems, they point to priority places for action, and we need to get people more aware of these resources. This is through the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative, and it's really a phenomenal mechanism, actually, of collaboration. But what we have to do in order to unlock the deals is to get the metrics right. And so driving down into data, down to recognizing what's already there, and also getting acceptability and understanding from the economic and finance community. This is something that's super important. So this is some of the work, of course, that UNEP does, but we also count on all of our partners to bring to the table their data, information, knowledge, and best practice. Because what we have to talk about is not planning for the next and planning for the next, but doing now. Thanks.
First. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much for convening this meeting. I'm Sonja Köppel, the Secretary of the Water Convention, and obviously we hope that transboundary cooperation remains high on the agenda, like it was already said by some predecessors. But I think the last conference was quite good in actually pushing to some commitments in the Water Action agenda, and also on some countries to announce, and for example, in our case, for several countries to join the Water Convention, etc. But I think the important is to make the step forward towards implementation, including the financing, like it was said by some before, and to have, so to say, concrete outcomes in this regard. And one idea, also a little bit building on what you have said before, could be to do on the sidelines. I mean, not as official program, because that's defined, as you have said. To do some sort of like matchmaking to enable actually those who are who will make commitments or who have made commitments as part of the Water Action Agenda in the past to actually get in touch with some of those who have, for example, the funding available, like the climate finance, as it was said just before. We have just organized last month such a matchmaking event, and that was actually quite successful in bringing together, in a way, on the one hand, project demanders, and on the other hand, technical financial partners, and maybe it could be an idea on the sidelines to do something similar, to have concrete outcomes on the different topics which are the topics of the interactive dialogue. Such as access to water, water governance, water pollution, transboundary cooperation, etc., etc. And
you next? Okay. Hi, everyone. So specifically on the kind of the themes of the interactive dialogues, I'll be quite honest, I don't really care. And there was a lot of work. Not because there wasn't a lot of work that went into them, and so we can keep them, we can tweak them, these sorts of things. But I want to go back to what Maggie has said and what others have said, that I think in these consultations and this work, we should really be focused on the outcomes that we want, and especially the post-2030. We really need to start working on that now. And so what that looks like for the member states, I'll leave that to my member states friends, and good luck. But from the non-state actor side, as you can even see in this room, and as I'm sure you've heard in all of your conversations and will continue to hear, the water community is extremely diverse. We all have our own opinions. We have our pet issues and our things like that. And frankly, that's okay. I know we get kind of in a bind about, there's too many things, there's too many, opinions, there's too many things, but
that's actually also the beauty of this space, and I think that was what they tried to capture with the Water Action Agenda. Now, it's unwieldy. I think there's a lot of work that we can do around that to make it better, to make it function. I like the idea of like a matchmaking type of thing that Sonia mentioned. But on that non-state actor side, how can we better utilize the work that went into that Water Action Agenda process? Are there new ways that we can kind of organize ourselves around, you know, I don't want to say themes, but also then the integration of the other sectors, because that was something that we didn't see very much, especially, and I'm going to mention this because I have to leave now to go to a food session. The food and agriculture space was totally missing in 2023, and so, not totally, but very much missing, and we need to do a better job of bringing them in, others as well. But that's what I would say, that really being, in terms of the preparatory process, be looking at post-2030 and how can we actually get outcomes that are meaningful, and what is that next, I don't want to say decade, but this next time period going to look like. Thanks.
I think what's interesting of this, so thanks again for doing this, because this is super helpful. I think we have to understand to diversify different layers, because we're a mixed bag as a global community, which is amazing. But before you know it, you put it all in one pot. And then, can be amazing soup, or it's terrible. So coffee and tomato soup is perhaps not the best mix, but, so just making sure that we understand and identify different layers. There's a clear need to talk about finance. But if you mix that with a UN water governance mechanism, forget it. You hit a wall before you start. But if you take them apart and organize them also as separate processes, parallel, not after one another, but parallel, it can work. So ensuring that you create the parallelity in this without mixing too much is going to be key. So if we want to look back to 2023, yes, we have to. There's no way that you can say, oh, we're going to start all over. At the same time, there is an opportunity for some aspects to start all over, because we were in a lock-in, so it's very helpful to get a fresh start. We have to get an alignment across all these, bring every sector in. But the moment you want to talk about global water governance and you bring every sector in, forget it, you hit a wall again. If we want to make a deal on specific, perhaps regional or specific topical projects, that is amazing, but don't mix that then with a conversation on the 3 Rio conventions or the UNECE. So I think identifying the layers and organizing those processes along those layers differently is going to be super helpful in identifying also success. So if you per layer would say, this is why my idea of success for 2026 and then 2028 and beyond, and at the same time ensure that you look at each other and say, oh, these are possible interlinkages, but don't organize them all the time across, because then you get a mixed bag. Then there might be at a certain point a reality check and say, okay, on this layer we won't get that far, but that's fine. But on finance, there's all of a sudden an opportunity, and on global governance, amazing. But on the conventions, perhaps less. I don't know. That's predictive. But the moment you take them apart, you're much better able to steer that process, identify where things are in a lock-in or more problematic, without mixing it all together. And I think towards the UN 2020 conference, we were not clear there, because we hadn't been practicing this for 46 years. So it was a little bit of a, trial and error. The modalities resolution for 2023 was also quite a bit of trial and error. 2018, we tried to get a modalities resolution for a conference. It was a total disastrous process in the UN system, among membership, with the UN system and non-state actors. We really we really made a big mess out of ourselves. So we're in a way better place, but on how do you say that? Well, taking it a bit apart in this complexity is going to help. At the same time, identifying ambitious goals per layer is also helpful because we need that. But don't expect from one another that all those ambitious goals per layer have to be delivered in 2026. It's fine. It's okay that 2026 at some point is a step towards something bigger. But also be able to identify something ambitious for 2026 as a global community is also a necessity. To that point, the G20, like the declaration that came out of Brazil, except for a call for trillions on water, is of course totally disappointing. But we know Brazil doesn't champion water at all, so we saw this coming. South Africa said we want to champion water in the context of the G20, and they will organize an investment summit in parallel. So focusing on the 1.5 trillion only. So that could be an anchor moment next year in moving towards 2026. And there are more of those processes around us. With 3 Rio conventions and the Ramsar convention coming up next year. How does it help us in the context of what we want to achieve in 2026? There's Brazil and Australia heading up, et cetera, et cetera. So being very much aware of the dynamics around 2026 in the context of the layers that you want to achieve is also going to be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone want the mic? Okay. I think we have this was the main question of the substance. I think we want to get deeper into the Rio Convention's point because this is something we've been hearing a lot. And if you've attended our session yesterday, we had a whole segment or panel about the alignment or integrating water across the Rio multilateral process with large, but Rio Convention specifically. So we see that So we see that a lot of people refer to, sorry Manu, I meant the main question. A lot of people refer to the Rio Convention. So if you've had that and you have specific reflections on point, we'd love to see like how do you see this happening? Like the how more than the what. We know that there is a need, but then how is the question. So if you have any thoughts that you want to start with. Anyone? Yeah?
Maybe people are not aware of the recent decision by all member states during the United Nations Environment Assembly in March this year on water governance. And I think that resolution points to a lot of content that this community can actually take to implement, to take to action, very clear direction from member states on what they're expecting from the world, and also the 9 major groups and stakeholders that supported that negotiation. So I want to just say the Rio Conventions also have water throughout them, right? And there's water programs in each and every one of them. And I just think that I'm concerned that we're not even close to 2030 goals, and we're always already thinking about post 2030. But how are we going to get to our 2030? How are we getting to the true 1.5 that's threatening our lives and livelihoods? The true 1.5 degrees Celsius. How are we getting there? And that's going to be through accelerating all of the Rio Conventions at once. And I strongly feel that that acceleration can happen through water action, through freshwater ecosystems protection, through restoration, and through setting the rules of engagement on use and use and sharing of water. So I think that each and every Rio Convention has a very particular slice and an important piece of the water dimension. And taking that together with some of the other ongoing commitments by countries is really important. So I would say that we really should be looking at the water dimension for the Rio Conventions and developing a program, programmatic synergies, not talking about false synergies of let's do this together, let's do that together. Let's write a water program, freshwater program that cuts across all of those Rio Conventions. And that speaks to the very strong messages that we heard as the only other universal membership of at the United Nations Environment Assembly. It's the only other universal membership besides the UN General Assembly. So everyone has that in their pockets. They can activate around that, insist, and fill the gaps that were clearly mentioned there.
So we forgot to celebrate another achievement of the 2023 conference, which was the nomination of a UN Special Envoy on Water. So wouldn't it be great if she had the responsibility for creating the relationships with each of these mechanisms, these conventions, to make sure, I mean, she can't do everything necessarily, but she can influence and create homes for water within those spaces, and not just the Rio Conventions as well. So maybe I can give it to Sonia, who has a... Oh, I thought you wanted the microphone. Yeah. So I think that's in terms of keeping the focus and creating the momentum, that would be an essential piece.
Oh, yeah, just briefly to come in, because I absolutely agree. And there is, of course, also the UN system-wide strategy for water and sanitation that she will be also working on. And I think coming back to our colleague's point of UNEP, on the Baku Water Declaration that will be launched tomorrow morning, I think that will also be essential, and also for the UN Water Envoy to work with that to ensure that water will get a home and be anchored at the Rio Conventions. So I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you. Indeed, in the UN system-wide strategy on water and sanitation, actually this mainstreaming of water into the other intergovernmental processes, such as the Rio Convention, is a major part of it, including as one of the 6 priority collaborative actions, which were agreed just a few weeks ago in New York. But having engaged myself in the climate process for the last few years, it's not so easy. I mean, talking here to negotiators, most of them say water is not discussed in the negotiations. We are here, the water community, talk among us about it, but the negotiators say it's not really mentioned except maybe, I mean, we have made a breakthrough in the GGA. That's really was great that we have, and actually we have one person here who maybe can share some lessons, Jose, who has been engaged in this. But, and the same, if we look at the outcomes from CBD, I mean, water is not really in there. And even at the upcoming UNCCD, it's not really in the decisions, it's not really in there. And I think we also, in order to really make an impact there, it means we need to really engage with them and understand them and try to find the right entry points, such as indeed adaptation. Now we're also trying to highlight the importance of water for mitigation, which is starting to be, but very, very little so far to be discussed. So, I mean, bringing those actors to the table at the UN Water Conference, for sure we should. But let's also remain realistic that we will not be able to have thousands of people from those other sectors, because they already are so busy with their own negotiations in there that they will not. So doing actually engaging at these other conferences, like a bit like we're trying to do here now, including through the Baku dialogue, et cetera, I think that's what's needed, and engaging in the relevant processes, such as what's going to happen next year is which is already ongoing now, the discussion on the indicators for the global goal adaptation. We need to make sure that water is rightly in there, because that will also influence the future climate finance decisions. And similar, I think we need to find a similar way in the CCD and CBD process. And finally, have a meaningful way to engage them. I mean, at the last UN Water Conference, actually the heads of the Rio conventions were there, but many people didn't even know about it. So I mean, they should be, for example, given a floor to speak in some of the major sessions, or just as some ideas.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Rumford. I'm new to this space. I've just joined WaterAid as the lead policy analyst on climate, so very much coming from the different conventions background. So I think this is a really interesting question about how we bring the Rio conventions into this conference. I have three thoughts. Firstly, building on what you were just saying, is the fact that water is really not present, or not as present, freshwater, as we would want it to be in a lot of the technical negotiations and documents within the Rio conventions at the moment, or at least within the outcomes that we're seeing. And so I think as we want to see water reflected more in those conventions, there is a first step that is really getting quite specific and quite technical, and taking people that know the spaces, and I know that we have done this on the GGA so far, to say, okay, well, where are the opportunities for fresh water in here, and then how do we get it into that space, into these conventions, into these outcomes. I'm not sure this conference is the right space for that, because that is less political and more really identifying, sorry about my voice, really identifying the routes and the tactics to get there. I think what this conference can be useful for across the conventions is taking the actors, both the non-state actors and the government actors, who know that water is really important within their climate, their biodiversity, their desertification spaces, know that water is important, are being told by their governments that they need to have stuff on water, but don't really know what that means, and also know that their governments or their companies or whatever have already made commitments under the various voluntary declarations in these spaces. And what we can do at this conference is provide a kind of reflection across the piece of what has been committed to in the different processes and in the different spaces, so that these actors can kind of see water as a unifying principle. They think, okay, we've committed to this in CBD space, we've committed to this in the UNFCCC space, and in that way bring a kind of strategy and a unifying momentum to all of these various commitments on water. And what that would achieve is providing some of that political significance to water, so that it isn't just a kind of nice opt in here, opt in there, and then forget about it. But actually, as they have made all of these commitments on water in these different spaces, here is the space, because it is a water-centric space, where we start to think through how they actually action those commitments, and to try and make the most of what has already come within the three conventions, and also therefore build on that for what can come next. The other reflection I just have, which kind of builds on what Henk was saying about keeping the different strands separate, is for someone who's new to the water space, but who has been in the climate and the biodiversity world a lot, when I heard that there were however many hundred commitments coming out of the last conference, to someone who, to any actors from the wider climate and nature space who are trying to get involved, that immediately is both very intimidating and also says this is too kind of technical a space for us to engage, and there's going to be too many things. And so I would really support kind of clarity of these are the different strands, these are the strands where we want climate actors, nature actors to engage, and these are the commitments that we're wanting out of them, so that what that signal sends for all of us here, we know how important water is. We know that every one of those commitments is vital. But for actors who are coming into it from more of a climate and nature space, the proliferation of commitments really reinforces that impression they have that this is nice to have and we'll do a little bit here and a little bit there. So I would really advocate for separate clarity of where they can get involved, and kind of fewer but really clear commitments on the climate and nature side, so that we can kind of gain meaningful action from those climate and nature actors. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any final reflections, but I'll pass it on to Shaima. We have a few wrap-up questions. Shaima.
Yeah, sure.
I would just wrap up from my perspective saying, look, what I believe we should be anchoring in is the 2.2 billion people who don't have access to water. We have a lot of cross-cutting themes here, and there's a lot of other entities in the UN and elsewhere that are focusing on a lot of things that are more cross-cutting. I think we need a North Star. I think how can it not be how are we going to get 2.2 billion people access to water, even more than that, sanitation? And unless we can connect everything we're talking about doing to make that happen, then I don't think we should be doing it. I think what we need to be able to do is to connect the dots between all of the different activities and initiatives and dialogue and say, this is how that maps to more people getting access to water. And to me, that should really be our North Star with this particular UN conference, because there's lots of other UN conferences that have their own North Stars. And that's what I believe we should be doing. And I think we should be looking at how do we multiply resources to that end. And everybody heard my opening comments. I think from my perspective, and it's only one, we leverage those resources by bringing in not only more public sector capital to connect to those 2.2 billion, but the private sector capital. And unless we recognize that 1.5 trillion is the roadblock, we're just going to be burying our heads in the sand, and we're not going to be serving the 2.2 billion people who need water.
Thank you. I think this is I think this is a very good way to kind of segue into kind of our next closing session. And thank you all for your insightful comments and feedback. And it's very kind of heartwarming to see kind of really thoughtful ideas and kind of how to be impactful. And I think in one of our sessions at Goals House, we talked about the input where every output we have in life, the input of it is water. And so we need to kind of look at it from kind of what is the equilibrium, making sure that we value water the way it should be, and kind of what are the drivers to have an impactful outcome, whether it's political will, policies, the governing body, but also having the right stakeholders in place, not necessarily closing it to only the water people, but beyond that as well. I think here we want to talk about kind of, we spoke about the themes and now we want to speak about the how, and I think we have kind of slightly touched on it, but we really want to look at kind of how do we accelerate kind of the implementation of SDG 6. Is there a track record? Is there kind of, do we know exactly where on the spectrum SDG 6 performance is? Can we trace that? Can we not? I see. And that's kind of a lot of ideas that come to mind. It's because if we don't see our road very clearly, we won't be able to know where we're going. And so these are the questions that we have set in mind. We spoke a lot about financing. Data and information is extremely critical, especially for in an area that's quite fragmented, such as water. And how do we unify that, but also make it less confusing or overwhelming from the 843 plus outcomes, for instance? And what are the different ways that we want to kind of avoid siloing? We spoke a lot about a lot of the foundations of how to improve, but we need to know exactly how to improve and how to take that to that next level. But also, I think we're overcomplicating a lot of stuff when it comes to water, because we know water is fluid, water is quite humble, water is essential, fundamental human rights, but we don't really value it the way we should be, because we also still look at it from a very different angle, and then the water gets dropped out. And so this is kind of the closing. We want to see if you have any further comments on the how, the impact, and take it to that next level, but also to ensure that we sustain it, ensuring that it's not only limited to the decade of water, because I don't think there needs to be a time frame for that, but there needs to be kind of not maybe rigid, but a really clear framework and a roadmap of what are these stepping stones to get to the end result. And the end result is to sustain water, value it, have an equilibrium, supply and demand, ensuring a circular water economy that continues and embeds within the various sectors as well. And so I give this kind of last few minutes for you guys if you have any further thoughts on it. But again, this has been extremely, extremely helpful. And I think Selma's youthful mechanism in bringing technology into the space is something obviously we will escalate and elevate into the water conference as well, bringing in new technologies. But I think everyone's input will play a big role in a bigger picture. So the floor is yours, please.
I just, super quick, I would just like to say that perhaps just a way to see the the themes, not in a linear way, but in a way that they reinforce each other. We are hearing here the importance of the ecosystems, but as well as the human right to water. And at the end, it's connected, because we won't get there if we don't have this, and the other way around. And I think, I will just finish, I think we need a global pitching narrative that brings us together. If we have succeeded in making it into a resolution, it's because we have been very simple and coming together, all of us, all the family together in once. And we thought it was impossible to bring the whole family into a one paragraph, but we did it. And that's why the negotiators understood us, because we came with one single narrative. It's a paragraph that brings all of us together. And I could say that this is the pitching we need to move forward.
Thank you. Anything else? I think the questions on the board, if they're just not clear to people because the font is so small, so I can read them out. And I think more or less we touched on them when we discussed the content itself. But it's about the cross-cutting accelerators that featured in the last UN Water Conference and continue to live with us as we look at the SDGs, financing, data and information, capacity building, innovation and governance. So how do you envision that cutting across the different themes? What are the different? We've heard a lot in the consultations over the last few months that the themes were great but to an extent they were also very siloed, like each theme focused, and like you didn't see a lot of cross-pollination between ideas between one theme and the other. So how can we bring the whole community together within the water conference context itself? And then the last one, how can we ensure that the dialogues are more interactive, inclusive, impactful, and solutions-oriented? So just reading them out loud for people who can't read, and then, or just like reflect on any closing reflections you have based on the session today. We have like 2 or 3 more minutes.
Thanks so much. I would say let's invest in the structures and the mechanisms that we have. Getting that one paragraph in a place that we need to get it is super important. I would just, we know that SDG 6 is the second least funded after ocean, so water, right? And we know that it's also one that's hugely trailing behind. The status of the SDG implementation is very well public and available on the UN Water SDG portal. And all of the UN Water members and partners are always putting amazing updates and midpoint reviews. So if you want to know the state of water, it's there. That's what we're monitoring. So please, let's not create another sort of new shiny thing. Let's find spaces that we're missing and really get to work. I think I'm a broken record here, but honestly, let's get to the actions. And if we're not talking about actions and we're still talking about discussions, this for me is a real problem. We'll never make 2030, and we're certainly not on track either for 2050. Thanks.
Anyone else? And I think we're right on time. Shaima, over to you.
Yeah, so thank you all. This has been extremely, extremely insightful. We're really happy that you wanted to start your morning with us today as we near the end of COP29. Our informal and our interactive consultations will continue, and we will be engaging more. If you also know of more stakeholders and audiences that you think should also be included in these consultations, we'd be really hopeful and kind of grateful if you can share them across. As we delve into kind of refining our vision statement, as mentioned earlier, this is extremely great. We understand the challenges, and we do want to. Us in Senegal want to seem like we are championing kind of and echoing what is needed out there in the water community, making sure that we get to the right outcomes and sustain them and take that to that next level. And so thank you all. I think it's been a wonderful kind of group of people talking about water from different angles. And so also as a diplomat, we'll make sure that there will be political, drive towards high ambition and momentum towards water. So thank you all. Thank you.